Hello, I'm SPJ North Carolina Chapter President Anique Joseph, and in this webinar titled How to Thrive and Make a Career in Business Journalism, we'll meet longtime business journalist and university professor Chris Roush, who is the author of 5 business journalism books and former dean of the Quinnipiac University School of Communications and the Walter Hussman Senior Distinguished Professor in Business Journalism at UNC-Chapel Hill, where he created the Business Journalism Program. His former students now work on the business desks of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News, Dallas Morning News, and American City Business Journal's publications. Chris got into business journalism because he needed a job. Fresh out of graduate school at the University of Florida, he wanted to be a sports journalist, so he called up a school friend who worked at the Sarasota Herald-Tribune. However, the only opening they had was for a business reporter. So he interviewed and landed his first job in journalism. Chris left after a year to the day after an unsolicited phone call from the business editor of the Tampa Bay Tribune, who had heard of Chris turning a lot of good stories well in Sarasota from a competing Tribune reporter.
I stayed at the Tampa Tribune for 2 years and 10 months. And the reason I left the Tampa Tribune was Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida in August of 1992. At the time, I was covering the insurance industry and healthcare on the business desk of the Tampa Tribune. Was on the first flight into Miami after Hurricane Andrew hit when they reopened the airport and covered a bunch of insurance-related stories down there. But the way that I got my next job, which was at Business Week magazine in New York, was this. I broke the story that Allstate insurance company was going to stop selling homeowners insurance policies in the state of Florida. And I broke that story 2 days before it appeared in the New York Times. And so what I did was I made a copy of my story in the Tampa Tribune, and then I made a copy of the New York Times story 2 days later, and I highlighted the dates on when they were published, and I mailed it to the chief of correspondence at Business Week magazine. He immediately turned around and called me and set up an interview. And so they hired me to go to Business Week's Connecticut bureau at the time to cover insurance and to cover really what else I could find. Probably the best job I ever had. From Business Week, I went to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution because I had grown up in Atlanta and was getting married at the time, and my wife-to-be was living in Atlanta, and she was making more money than I was. So I left Business Week and went to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where I worked for, again, about 3 years. And again, got a phone call one day from the Atlanta bureau chief of Bloomberg News, who said, we need a Coke reporter. We need a reporter to cover beverages. It was somebody actually that I knew from my time in Tampa. But again, I didn't apply for that job. And so I went to Bloomberg and covered Coke and Pepsi and Anheuser-Busch and a bunch of other publicly traded beverage companies out of really all around the country. And so I'm at Bloomberg, and I get a call one day from a headhunter telling me that there's this publishing company in Charlottesville, Virginia that publishes newsletters and magazines for investors, and they need somebody to come start an insurance publication. And the way that he had gotten my name is that the chief information officer of this company was actually a guy I'd gone to high school with and had kept in touch with. So again, I didn't apply for that job either. My point in telling you all of you this is business journalism for me was an accidental career. It's been a great career, though. I love business journalism. Anybody that knows me knows that I love talking. about business journalism. Um, but I still also believe that business journalism is the area of journalism, the only remaining area of journalism where it's very easy to get a job. Um, I run a website called talkingbiznews.com that covers the world of business journalism. And every day I am posting 3, 4, 5 job openings in business journalism around the country and sometimes on the other side of the world. Um, there are constantly jobs in business journalism. If you know how to be a business journalist, business journalism jobs also tend to pay much more than other types of journalism jobs, both reporters and editors. And so there's also that to look at. So I'm going to end by talking a little bit about some different things that, as I reflect back on my career and as I reflect on the careers of my former students who are now in business journalism, to me, there are kind of 6 general traits that I think make a business journalist successful. Number 1 is curiosity. If you are a curious person and you want to find out stuff, I think this is true for all types of journalism, but probably more especially true for business journalism because businesses in general don't like to disclose information freely the way that news and information gets disclosed on other beats. So if you're curious and you know, or you're interested in finding out something about a company or about a business executive, I think that's just a huge trait. I still am curious about different companies and different people, and am constantly surfing some search engines that I use to help me find information. The second is learning. As I mentioned in the beginning, when I was in college and when I was in graduate school, I took no economics classes and no business classes. So I felt like that really set me behind in terms of when I started as a business reporter. I really had to learn some basics, like how to read an income statement, how to read a balance sheet, how to decipher what was happening when the unemployment numbers came out, for example. One of the best things that I did early on in my career was I reached out to a bunch of accounting people. Both my sister and her husband are accountants. I've got other relatives that are accountants, but one of the things that I did in my first job in Sarasota was becoming friends with an accountant in town. And I would often take things to him and say to him, help me explain this to me in a way that I can then explain it to my readers. And that was very helpful. And I feel like today I am still constantly learning about things related to business and things related to the economy. So if you can take economics or business classes now, I highly advise it. Or if you can find somebody who can mentor you, I think that's great too. I will say that my sister and her husband, who were working for Grant Thornton in Atlanta, when I went to Atlanta as a reporter and started covering companies that they were doing the books for, stopped talking to me. So there is that downside. Number 3 is show me the money. If you are looking for a business story, all you need to do is find where the money is going, who's paying who, how much are they paying, and why. And I think this is important not just in business journalism. It's important in all types of journalism. It's important in education. It's important in crime a lot. It's important in government, county governments, state governments, federal governments. If you can find the money and who's getting the money and who's paying the money, that is usually where the story is at. Everything in this world, unfortunately, revolves around money. And so if you can find the money and where the money is going to, then I think that will be incredibly helpful to you. Next one, public records. Becoming well-versed in public records is very valuable. And I feel like I can say this because I spent more than 20 years in academia, but journalism schools do a really good job of teaching future journalists how to find public records for like the government beat or the education beat or the crime beat. But they do a really crappy job in general of teaching students how to find public records about companies and about executives. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you know that you can get all kinds of public documents for publicly traded companies, companies that trade on one of the stock exchanges. But where I kind of made my name or a niche when I was in business journalism was figuring out where the information was filed about private companies, companies where the stock is not traded on a stock exchange. And the basic point I would make to you here is that somewhere, somehow, every private company discloses just as much information as public companies do. You just have to learn where to find it, where to look it up. But there are state regulatory agencies. There are federal regulatory agencies besides the Securities and Exchange Commission that regulate companies and regulate industries. And so if you know how to find that information, that is a gold mine in business journalism, in my opinion. I feel like I got a lot of the jobs that I got when I was in business journalism because I had gained a reputation of being able to write about private companies and being able to report about private company stories that nobody else was reporting. Zig while others zag. To me, there's a big issue in business journalism out there today in that most people are writing the same story. For example, there are 15 to 20 different journalists who will write a daily stock market story from Monday through Friday. There are 20 to 25 journalists who will write an Apple earnings story when Apple's earnings come out. And so when I say zig while others zag, what I mean is looking for the stories that nobody else is writing. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The day after Christmas or the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday in the retail world is one of the biggest shopping days of the year. And there are tons of stories written on Black Friday about retail sales where business reporters who cover the retail beat go out and interview shoppers. In Atlanta, I was covering the retail beat. And so I thought to myself, I'm not going to write the typical Black Friday retail shopping story. And so what I did was I set up with Target actually to spend Black Friday with a store manager, the store manager for one of their stores in Atlanta. And I wrote my Black Friday story from the perspective of a Target store manager who had gotten to work at 3 a.m. in the morning and was there until 6 o'clock at night. And what she goes through and what she does and how she runs that store during the busiest day of the year. So when I say zig while others zag, that's an example of what I mean. The other thing, the last thing that I will say before we open it up for questions is this, and that is persistence pays off. I am one of those people where I am constantly trying to get the story. When I was in Tampa, for example, I was writing about the issues that the state workers' compensation system was having. And the state workers' compensation system is and was managed by the Department of Labor for the state of Florida. And so I was really digging into workers' compensation. I know that doesn't sound like the most exciting topic, but I wanted to talk to the Secretary of the Department of Labor about what he was going to do to fix the problem. And so I called and left a message, and I didn't hear back. And so the next day, I called and left a message, and I didn't hear back. I called him for 38 consecutive days. I was very polite. A lot of times, when I would call, I would get his administrative assistant, and she was very polite back to me as well. She was like, "Yeah, Secretary Suggs has your message and your phone number," and so we would kind of chuckle sometimes. But on the 39th day, he called me back, and we had a very long interview. I still do this to this day. And let me give you an example. I'm currently the executive editor of Business North Carolina magazine here in North Carolina. And so I'm writing some stories for the magazine. There is a company based here in North Carolina that is very well known throughout the Southeast. Its CEO has never given anybody an interview. There are people in the town where the company is headquartered who don't even know that the company is headquartered in this town, and they don't even know who the CEO. I was able to get the CEO's cell phone number, and I'm not going to disclose how I got the cell phone number, but I got his cell phone number, and I started texting him. And I've been texting him now about once every couple of weeks for 4 months, good 4 months. And he's obviously very media averse. So in the texts, I've been explaining to him the type of story that I would like to write about his company and why. And that I've used some other tactics with him. About a couple of days before Christmas, I just sent him a message saying, "Hey, just want to let you know, I hope you and your family have a great holiday." And on Christmas Day, he texted me back. So there's that. Being persistent does pay off as long as you are professional, and you follow what I call the Columbo method of journalism. There used to be a detective called Lieutenant Columbo who had a TV show in the 70s and 80s, and he always told the person who was guilty what he was doing throughout the entire show. And I really believe that that's the way that journalists should operate. You should always tell the people you're writing about exactly what you're doing, so there are no surprises when the story gets published. And so with that, I am going to stop and see what questions we have.
I have just a couple.
Okay.
So I believe that when people in general think of business journalism, they think of just information, numbers, companies. But when you talked about the Target story, there was a character in there. Can you kind of
Yeah.
elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I thought the same thing, Anik, when I started business journalism. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a boring job. I'm going to have to write about numbers. Numbers is, not my forte. But what I found was that business journalism is about people, and it's about how companies affect people, both positively and negatively. And when you're writing about the economy, it's about what's happening in the economy and how people are adjusting to what's happening in the economy in terms of their own spending or where they work or different things like that. So I have always focused my writing around the people and how people are being affected. So, for example, that workers' comp series that I mentioned from 30 years ago when I was in Tampa. Um, if I could dig that out right now, you would see example after example of somebody who had been hurt or injured on the workplace or in the workplace, and how the crappy workers' comp system was screwing them over. Um, it was just example after example after that. And that's still what I try to do in my business journalism, because anecdotes like that sometimes help tell the story better than the numbers. Uh, when I used to teach a class called economics reporting, I banned the students from quoting economists in their stories. What they had to do was to go actually interview consumers, or when they were writing about unemployment, to go interview people standing in line at the unemployment office to file for benefits. So I try and during my teaching career, I tried to dissuade people from thinking about business journalism as boring numbers, and to think about it as there are some huge companies in this world, and they are impacting me and you on a daily basis. So how are you going to write about them from that perspective?
So humanizing the story,
Yeah,
essentially. Okay.
essentially.
Okay. And then my other question was, in when you have just a, general assignment, you have ways to find stories, people that you run into the store, for example. You have press releases. Can you just kind of talk a little bit more about where you can find stories?
Sure. Get out and talk to people. I mean, to me, that's the best thing. One of the things that I've done since I have come back to North Carolina 6 months ago was reconnecting with people that I knew when I was here, both in the business community and elsewhere, and kind of make it clear that I'm looking for stories, and um, that's paid off. Um, because I was at UNC for 17 years. I taught a lot of students who went into not just journalism, but public relations and advertising. And I have reconnected with a lot of them who now work at big companies here in North Carolina, and have gotten some stories out of developing those relationships. Just getting out and talking to people, to me, is probably the best thing.
Okay. And then my last question, and then I'll go. There's a couple here. Um, how can somebody know what they're beat within business? What they're good at, what you think would maybe interest them. Would it be maybe just trying it out? Can you kind of elaborate on that? Talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So my first business journalism job, as I mentioned, Sarasota Herald Tribune, 1989. I was the business reporter for an entire county, so I wasn't really specialized. It meant I covered Tropicana, so that meant I had to learn about orange juice and the beverage industry. It also meant that I covered the port of Manatee, so I had to cover transportation and imports and exports. It also meant that I had to cover two really big boat companies at the time, Chris Craft and Donzi, which were based in the county. So I had to learn about the boating industry. Um, and then I had to learn, the monthly unemployment story for Manatee County. I would write that. So what I would say to answer your question, Anik, is um, having a job like that, and that's where a lot of entry level business reporting jobs are like. You're going to cover a lot of different stuff, and what you will find out is what you like and what you don't like. Now, when you move up to a place like the Wall Street Journal or CNBC or some of the American City Business Journal, publications or even a large metro newspaper like the Los Angeles Times or the Dallas Morning News, their business beats do get a lot more specialized. So, for example, when I was in Atlanta, my beat was two companies, Coca-Cola and Home Depot, you know, but that's because at the time the business news desk in Atlanta was 45 people. And so we could really specialize. But at Bloomberg, there's a reporter who just covers Apple. And now there's a reporter who just covers Microsoft. Um, Same thing at the Wall Street Journal. Same thing a lot at CNBC. You can specialize in a specific beat like retail or manufacturing or technology. Technology is a big business beat. Um, so when you move up, if you are still interested in business journalism, what you're going to find is you can become more specialized in a beat that you prefer to cover. So, like if you like to shop, retail might not be such a bad beat for you if you get to cover like the big department store chains and get to do stuff like that. Sounds like fun.
Okay, and just going off of what we were just talking about, uh, the landscape of journalism is changing. And so when we started, uh, we had to start in small places before we got to big places. Now, students right out of school have opportunities to go to big places. So would you say it would kind of be better to go like you did it, where you kind of had an opportunity to cover everything, got that experience, and knew what you liked before you would go to like LA Times, for example?
Yes, because if you're going to go someplace like the LA Times right out of college, unless you've been, writing 50 stories every year for your college paper or even your high school paper, um, you're not going to have the experience. You're not going to know um, how to find court records, for example, how to find if a CEO has ever been arrested, things like that, that to me have proven invaluable in my business journalism career. Um, Knowing how to go look up real estate records um, for companies and for people, invaluable. But things that I learned and sometimes failed at early on in my career.
Okay. So now I'm going to go to Dijon. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. He said I'm a student at a technical college getting my diploma and business management certificate. I have 2 classes left for business and 3 for my diploma. My diploma is in media production and recording art. Most definitely it is. He's been in retail since 2013. December would be 10 for me. Oh, okay. So he's just persistence is
But
everything. He totally
yeah,
agrees.
yeah. But Dijon, if you can get some writing before you get that diploma and before you get that certificate, because if you want to go into journalism or business journalism, people are going to want to see clips. They're going to want to see how you can write and how well you can write and how well you can report. That was one of the surprising things for me, I think, when I got into business journalism was I had no business clips to send the Sarasota Herald Tribune. What they wanted to see, though, were clips that showed my reporting abilities and my writing ability. So don't worry about if you don't have business related clips.
Okay. So would you suggest maybe there's free publications that are out there just to get the
Yeah,
experience?
yeah,
There's
or
a lot
just
of
offer,
web, a lot of
yeah,
digital.
offer yourself as a freelancer to local publications and just say, I want to write some business stories.
Okay. Now, Uma, she says, how have you gotten people to trust you, open up to you beyond the method that you just described? And what are some records on private companies you regularly turn for stories? What kind of stories have you done with those?
Okay. So just so everybody knows, Uma was my intern last semester. Uh, Uma, one of the things that I did a lot in Atlanta was I would take sources out to lunch, or I would just call up people and say, I want to learn more about your company, or I just want to talk to you strictly off the record. Um, and I would meet with these people um, multiple times, and sometimes I never would even quote them. But I wrote a really deep investigative piece about a publicly traded company in Atlanta that no longer exists. And my best source for those stories that I wrote was the woman who was the former vice president of human resources at the company. She was no longer there. She had left. And this woman and I probably had lunch maybe 20 times, uh, or coffee, or whatever. I never quoted her in a story, but she developed a trust in me over the course of that time, and really helped me in telling me where to go, and what to look for in terms of records, in terms of lawsuits, who else to talk to. Um, so there's that method. The other method that I have employed a lot is, when you're interviewing somebody and they want to talk off the record, and you agree to talk off the record, because it's not really off the record until you agree. When we're done, I will go back to that person and say, listen, you said this 15 minutes ago off the record. I'd really like to be able to say that in my story on the record and attribute it to you. Are you comfortable with that part being on the record? So going back and talking to people, um, and I think that helps develop trust as well, that you are willing to abide by the confidential off the record agreement, but that, you're making it clear to the source that you want them to know that you're still a journalist as well.
Can you kind of talk about off the record? What does that really mean? Um,
It
like for
means different
example,
things to different people.
right? Like if you, let's say somebody tells you something about a company, and off the record to them means you can't even mention that. If you do, they'll know who told you. Just like that. Can you kind of break it down? And also, who would you never do off the record? So, like if it was a politician or something that was doing business, that's kind of somebody you have to hold
Yeah,
accountable.
yeah.
So, can you kind of break that down, please?
Sure. I mean, to me, off the record and background and deep background are terms that are not universally agreed upon what they mean in journalism. But here is what I've always done. Somebody tells me something off the record. I cannot attribute that to them in any shape or form. But what I can do with that information is go see if I can get it verified from another source. And I think what most publications will do or say is that if you can get that fact verified by two people off the record, then that is safe enough to publish. Now, there are other places where they have a more stringent rule about off the record, but to me, that's what off the record means. It means I can take that information, I cannot attribute it to the person, but I can go take that information to other sources to see if they can verify it either off the record or on the record. In terms of background, um, my definition of background has always been uh, I can use this information, but I can't use your name to that information. But what I can do is use a phrase that lets people know where that information is coming from or why this person knows that information. So you see this all the time in DC, says a senior White House official, or says a top aide to a congressman, you know. So that's kind of how I define background, is that I can use the information, but I can't attribute it to the person's name. To me, deep background is you can use the information, but you can't attribute it to the person in any shape or form. So this is what when I was in Atlanta, this is what we used to call writing like the word of God. Um, you would just state the fact in the story, but it would have no attribution whatsoever. It wouldn't have, said a senior Coca-Cola official. It would just state the fact, no attribution whatsoever.
When would you just, even if they say I want it off there, let's say they say it. For example, I don't know. Let's say it's a company and they say it by mistake that let's say you were talking and they said off the record and they just say something like illegal. Like, yeah, actually we have been dumping, toxic chemicals in the river. What do you do with
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one, Unique. I think I think in the end you've got to find a way to report that story. You've got to find a way to verify the information somewhere else. And this is going to get you in trouble sometimes. And I'll give you an example. Um, I once interviewed the CEO of Coca-Cola, and he told me something, but it was an off the record conversation. And so he said, we're going to announce this next week. And I just want to tell you about it now so you'll have some quotes. But like the next day, I get an analyst report in the mail, and the analyst who covers Coca-Cola had, in this published report, said what the company was going to announce the next week. I went to my editor and we decided that we needed to go ahead and publish that story because it was out there. It was in this analyst report. Company was not happy. But, I explained to them that it was in this analyst report, and we were afraid if we didn't write it, somebody else was going to.
Okay.
So getting back to Uma's second question about records on private companies, Uma, if you're interested, I can send you a whole PowerPoint on my favorite places to go. I start with Secretary of State's office because every company has to be incorporated with the Secretary of State's office, and you can find out who the owners are, who the top executives are. Sometimes those documents will have their phone numbers if you're having trouble reaching somebody. And the thing that I always like to look for with that is they have to actually renew that every year. And if they haven't renewed their incorporation records with the state, that's typically a sign that they may be having some financial problems. I will then, depending on what industry that business is in, will go to a state agency that regulates that industry and see what kind of information they have on that company. And I'll give you a Chapel Hill example here, Uma. I used to get my hair cut in a place on Rosemary Street. And one day, just for kicks, because I'm bored and I'm sitting in my office on my computer, I decided to go to the North Carolina State Cosmetology Board, which regulates barbershops, to see what kind of records they had on the guy who cuts my hair. And there was some weird stuff in there. I'm not going to really get into it, but I stopped going to them. And I now get my hair cut at the Great Clips up by the Harris Teeter. So there's just incredible types of state regulatory stuff. If you're writing a story about a restaurant, get their latest inspection. Did the inspector find roaches in the kitchen? That stuff is just golden, and as far as I'm concerned. Insurance companies are regulated by the insurance department in every state. So even if it's a private insurance company, you can get information. The federal government regulates every single bank in this country, even the private ones. The National Traffic Safety Board, NTSB, regulates all trucking companies. So again, if you can just think of what you're trying to figure out or what you're trying to find on a company, there's a regulator that covers them. Getting back to specific company things, I'm a big believer in checking the the Occupational Safety and Health Administration website, OSHA, checking the OSHA website to see if they've ever had any workplace fatalities or injuries or been fined by OSHA for having an unsafe workplace. I also love to stick in company names into the Patent and Trademark Office's database to see if the company has filed any recent patents or trademarks. When I was covering Coca-Cola, for example, I broke the story of when they rolled out Dasani, their bottled water product, because they had filed for the Dasani trademark with the patent office and trademark office about 6 months before they actually physically introduced it. Uma, I could go on and on. I love looking up CEOs' houses and how much they paid for. I love looking up campaign contributions that CEOs and companies make. I can tell you a whole bunch of stories that I've written. Probably the best OSHA story I wrote or have seen was a golf course that got fined very heavily because one of their workers drowned in the lake on the golf course. So I'm just trying to think of some other good ones.
Now, are these easy to access? Like in Crime Pacer, you have to pay for that. Are these free? Is it hard to?
Most of them are free.
And that's by law, right? By law, they have to be available to the public.
Yeah, I mean, there are some states that will try and charge you for access to like the Secretary of State's database to look up stuff. And sometimes things are not online, so you have to request them. So, for example, I have an outstanding request with a North Carolina State Regulatory Agency right now, where I have asked for the financial reports for a company for the last couple of years. And I think I asked for those maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and I still haven't gotten them. So there are things that still are not online. State and county lawsuits. What Anique was mentioning was Pacer, where you can get any federal court document off of Pacer, but it costs. Most state and county lawsuits are not online. You can get the dockets of the judges online to know which cases they're going to be a hearing, but you still can't get like the actual complaints or the replies or affidavits that are filed. You actually still have to go physically to the courthouse to get those for lawsuits in most places. Bankruptcy court is the same way. You really can't get good bankruptcy court records off of the bankruptcy court websites.
And I think that's by design, right? We'll just leave it at that. That was a rhetorical question. Now, Rebecca's on. She says, who knows who are your sources, even when it's just background? Do your bosses or those who hire you demand the names before you publish your story? That's actually a good question. And in that question, you know how sometimes you'll have somebody who wants to say anonymous? Would you share that with your boss?
I've worked at both places, both types of places, Rebecca. I worked at places where my editors didn't want to know. They asked for titles or what their positions were, but they never really asked names. But at Bloomberg, when I worked at Bloomberg, they wanted to know the names. So I think it's just what the newspaper or the newsroom's policy is, even when it's just on background. I will say that just personally for me, one of the things that I found useful was Excel spreadsheets where I would keep the names of the people and their phone numbers and how I contacted them. just in case I ever needed to disclose that. But it also helped me develop a source list.
Well, speaking of that, I was going to ask you because you said, you're waiting on records from here, you're waiting to speak to a CEO there. How do you organize all of this? Do you have folders? Do you print them out? Do you put them on Excel?
Um, I think, Anik, I'm a pretty intense guy in person, or pretty high level energy person. I just have always been very organized in my mind, and so until I start feeling like I'm losing my mind, I'm just going to keep it in my brain.
So, to answer the question, would you just say it's to each his own?
To each his own.
When you have
Yeah,
that desk that's everywhere and somebody wants to organize, it's like, no, 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 don't do that. You're
yeah.
messing up my
Whatever
system.
you're most comfortable with, that's what you should do.
Okay. Rebecca has another question. Are there certain breaking stories like train derailments or hotel fires that trigger business investigations? And how do you start digging?
You know, yes. The short answer is yes. And to me, this is the second day story. Train derailments, you want to look up that company and see if they've ever had a derailment before. And you also want to check on what their maintenance records are. You can get that from the National Traffic Safety Board. Um, Hotel fires, again, pull the real estate records. When was the hotel built? Um, is there anything in those zoning and planning records that show what type of material was used to build the hotel? Who owned the hotel? And did they have insurance? Is it going to be rebuilt with that insurance money? Um, is somebody been charged with the fire, and could they be sued for damages? Um, so Rebecca, I guess my answer to you is I'm going to start the next day looking at public records and seeing what I could find.
Okay. We're just going to kind of circle back on when you talked about the zig and the zag, and you kind of want to be different than everybody. So right now, one of the biggest stories is on the Boeing, the plane with the plug that went out, and the one that was coming from Florida that was on fire. So can you just give an example of what everybody's doing, and maybe how would you look at it a different way, a different angle?
So believe it or not, this story hits kind of home, and I'm going to tell you why. My college roommate was an aerospace engineer, and his first job out of college was going and working at the space shuttle at Cape Canaveral. His second job was going to work for Boeing in Seattle. And his current job, he now works for the Federal Aviation Administration in Seattle, inspecting Boeing jets.
Wow.
And making sure that they are safe to fly. So a story like that, I'm going to go to my college roommate and I'm going to ask him to walk me through the inspection process before the plane was allowed to fly and how that inspection process failed. I haven't seen that story. I've seen, like the planes have been grounded, and Boeing and the airplane companies are now inspecting the jets. And I've seen the stories about the company that manufactured the door, but I haven't seen a story about when this plane was being built, how was it inspected and how was it insured for safety? And how did that fail?
And then the follow up to the other plane, because like I said, it just happened, and now we have one
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, okay, I think that's any last questions? Going once, going twice. I think that's it. Do you want to go ahead and kind of just wrap up, persistence, find your beat. Don't rush into getting into to try to be with the LA Times right away. Trying to.
Yeah. Just, if you're passionate about journalism and you're passionate about business journalism, I highly recommend business journalism. It is not boring at all. If you're writing about companies and you're writing about people, that's I think that's a great way to do it. Just learning about business, learning about economics, learning the best ways to find that information, public records, persistence. Yeah.
And then your email is up there. People can reach you for what?
Anything. I make this offer to everybody that I talk to about business journalism. If you want to talk about a story, I'm available. If you want to talk about an idea that you have, I'm available.
All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Thanks, everybody.